We're live. Good. Okay, tonight's speaker is Alexander Dvorak. Alexander is going to give you an introduction to Austrian economics, what he calls Praxeology 101. He became interested in Austrian economics in his teens when he noticed economists on television were consistently wrong and in conflict, but nevertheless highly regarded. Eventually, he found Mises.org and has been fascinated by Austrian economics ever since. He's 24 years old. He's been studying economics since he was 15. He graduated from UCCS with a BA in economics. And so you see here it says Praxeology 101 PowerPoint. You click on that, it brings up his show. So come on up, Alexander. Let's give him a big welcome.
Yeah, thanks by the way, Paul, for introducing me. So I'm going to be talking about praxeology today. If you don't know what it is, that's okay. Not a lot of people do, and I designed this to kind of answer these three questions. What is praxeology? How do we use praxeology? And why praxeology matters, this seemingly arcane word. So by the end of this presentation, I hope we can all answer these three questions. I needed an assistant today, and since I wanted to start, I'm working under the assumption that nobody knows anything about economics, so I had to find somebody that knew nothing about economics. So I have Mr. Paul Krugman will be my assistant today, and his various states of emotional disquietude, elation, puzzlement will hopefully serve as a barometer for our presentation. So, praxeology. I'm going to read a quick definition that I came up with. It's okay if you don't understand this right now. This is something that hopefully you'll look back on by the end of this presentation and you can say, oh, okay, I get that. So praxeology is an a priori methodology of Austrian economics. It starts from the statement humans act, known as the action axiom, and verbally deduces its claims. The practice of praxeology is truly what separates Austrians from public choicers, Keynesians, and historicists. Economics is a subset of praxeology concerned with how humans trade. Praxeological truth stands independent of temporal and spatial constraints. And like I said, if that doesn't jive immediately, hopefully it will in a second. Like I said, I want to give this as something that we're going to return to at the end of this presentation, and you'll say, okay, I got it. So why are we even talking about praxeology? Besides like the fact that I'm obsessed with it and so on. Praxeology is important. Praxeology is really important because we don't really have a basis in our society for epistemological and methodological understanding. We don't actually teach epistemology and methodology in school. And as a recent product of the educational system, I know this firsthand. You can talk to a professor, you can say, well, yeah, Kant is a great guy. And the professor will nod his head, yeah, I think he's a German, I think he wrote a book. That's it. That's the extent. And even in the hard sciences, methodology and epistemology is confused at best when it's just not completely ignored. I think most people will realize that you have a physics student who realizes, well, I need to observe, form a hypothesis, and test my hypothesis through repeated experiments. Okay, but they don't necessarily understand why. They don't understand why and how we get knowledge. And so epistemology and methodology are very important from a pedagogical standpoint because we need to understand how we go from a state of not understanding to a state of understanding. And I think that that's very, very fundamental, but completely ignored in academia. So that's one of the reasons. The Austrian school is actually more radical, and I'm going to actually get a drink of water. The Austrian school is more radical, sorry for going off camera, is more radical for its methodology than for its political beliefs. And I think that seems somewhat odd, because you'd say, well, how do you get more radical than an anarcho-capitalist, right? Like, okay, I want to abolish all government. That's a pretty radical position. But in fact, the methodology of the Austrian school is much more radical than its politics. And what I mean by that is that the Austrian school is so distinct within science that it has no counterpoint, no counterpart. Nobody even stands against it. I mean, when they comment, I remember reading one comment on Mises's methodology. The critic read the first few chapters of Human Action, and he said, I think Mises's methodology was cranky and idiosyncratic. And it kind of stops. And so you have this like rediscovery of economics, this almost renaissance in proper methodology in economics, and it's sort of just like, it's kind of cranky. It's too fussy, it's too difficult, I don't like it. And that's unfortunately where we're at in the sciences. And so if you were to tell somebody that an Austrian doesn't believe in observing, forming a hypothesis, and then testing, they'd say, what do you mean? Because most people grow up with the idea, I'm sure we all did in this room, that we go to to do science, we observe something, we form our hypothesis, and then we test it again. You know, we do science projects. The kid grows a potato in water, or I don't know, I never did science projects. I was a terrible student, so don't take my word for this. But I think they grow potatoes or something in water. They're like, okay, potato grows best in a little bit of salt water. Then they come to their conclusion. But if you were to tell somebody that economics doesn't function like this, that the knowledge we gain in economics cannot be brought about in this manner, in this same exact manner, people would say, what do you mean? Like, how else do you get knowledge? And so that is what praxeology is a little bit. I'll continue on, but and this is why the Austrian school is more radical and perhaps more sequestered in academia. Austrians are somewhat isolated in academics, and I think a large part of it has to do with this rejection of this methodology. Partly for intellectual reasons, but I would say more in fact for practical reasons. Let me give you an example. Praxeology is predicated, as I said, a priori, which I'll get to in a second, but it's predicated on logic and on simple deduction from conversation. Now, it doesn't take a lot of research assistants to come up with a praxeological deduction. It's very, very difficult, but it doesn't take a whole team of research assistants, it doesn't take a lot of grant money, it doesn't take a lot of state and federal funding. But contrast this to something like planetology, like climate science, where you have teams of research assistants gathering data who come up with these conclusions, who then go and they fact check it, and they go through this whole, I almost want to say, bureaucratic process in academia that involves these many people performing these various, essentially feckless functions that have no bearing in reality, unfortunately. But that's what they know, and that's how the system operates today. And so this is why I think Austrians are somewhat marginalized in academia, and why it's important for us in this room, especially, to understand praxeology. Okay, and the next reason also, I think Paul mentioned this, why I was initially interested in Austrian economics was because I'm sure we've all experienced this on the television, on radio, you would constantly hear economists, right? There's almost these like wizards or magicians that live in sky castles that forecast the future for us and say, well, the economy tomorrow is gonna be good, or the next day it's gonna be bad, or depending on whatever political point of view that they're trying to push at any given time, on any given station, etc. And how do you reconcile this? If a physicist was to tell you, there's a comet that's going to collide with the Earth tomorrow, and another one said, there's no such thing as comets, how do you even begin to evaluate the profession of physics? Like, it doesn't make sense. But yet, this is how we present economics today. We have one person saying we're in a depression, we're in a recession. Nope, we're in sideways growth. Nope, we're actually growing healthily. how can you reconcile all these things together in one? It's a circus almost, right? Economics has turned into, and economists have turned into a circus. I mean, forget dismal science. I mean, this is like clown science, right? We have these people, and these people are respected, right? These people are actual, like, you know, I work for the Federal Reserve Bank. I control your money. I mean, that's a pretty important position. I teach your children about economics. That's a somewhat important position too, if you don't want your kids to be stupid. But all right, so we're moving on. Now, I think a very fundamental thing to understanding praxeology is this. The difference between a priori and a posteriori. And the difference, as I have in this beautiful chart here, is that, and these fancy words mean before the fact and after the fact. This is pretty much the fundamental difference between praxeology and empiricism, what we practice today, what we call science. A priori is going to be something like geometry, right? And why is a priori geometry? Because when you take somebody like Euclid, right? Euclid wrote the Elements, greatest, maybe the greatest mathematics book ever written, in my opinion. I know we have like mathematics teachers here, so they're going to beat me up after the presentation, but in my opinion, the greatest mathematics book written. Well, it was written 2,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago. How can that be? How can we have a mathematics book so old and so relevant today? Well, that's because it's a priori. And the reason that it's still relevant today is because it's not confined to any point in time. A priori becomes before the fact. If Euclid defines a line as a line, and then he defines a parallel as a parallel, and then he goes on to prove X, Y, and Z theorems from this. And all of a sudden, we have geometry. We can figure out what degrees of what parts of the angles we're talking about. We can design buildings predicated off of this science that seemingly comes from nowhere. Euclid didn't go to Spain and say, well, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. He didn't use algebra either, but he didn't go to Spain and say a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or he didn't have to take a time machine back in time and test this theory. There's no testing involved. This is pure deduction from axiomatic positions, from logical positions. And this is very, very fundamental, and this is why I would contrast it to something like physics. Physics, on the other hand, is a science that we must say this particle moves at this speed. We can't ever know before the fact. There's no way for me to say, I'm sitting and reflecting on life, and I'm like, okay, I'm coming up with my ideas. I'm thinking, well, that makes a lot of sense that if I define an angle like this, then this angle must consequently be X. Physics, there's no way. You can't say, well, I think photons travel at this speed. We can't do that. We can't come up with a logical before the fact reason. This is after the fact. We observe, well, photons, as a side note, but we observe photons, and we understand the speed from that. We test it repeatedly. Recently, for example, in physics, there's a big shake-up. When the lab in Italy announced that they found something that's traveling faster than the speed of light. Why is this such a big deal? Well, because, why is this even possible, right? Nobody's going to come out and say tomorrow, well, I figured out that a squared plus b squared doesn't equal c squared. Not going to happen. Not going to happen in 1,000 years, not going to happen in 2,000 years. The universe simply doesn't function in that capacity. Human beings can't imagine a squared plus b squared doesn't equal c squared. It's simply logically impossible. Physics, on the other hand, perhaps we can observe that a photon or something does travel faster than light. And so this is why something like this big shakeup in physics recently was so interesting, even if it doesn't prove to be true. Because we're constantly testing in hard sciences what is actually happening. We do have to go to Spain to test if a particle moves X speed. We do have to test in 20 years if a tree, if this tree is green, or we do have to test in New Mexico and in Italy if a type of cactus grows in the same manner. These are all after the fact. We observe something that's happening after the fact. And so that's the difference between these two, before the fact and after the fact. And what I'm suggesting is that praxeology is before the fact. It's a science that's conducted before we have any observations. We don't need to observe, for example, we don't need to observe that, that tariffs will be a negative factor on our economy. We can know this through logical deductions starting from an action, or from the human action axiom, which I'll get to in a little bit. But and so I have here a little bit is a priori is about future and past. It controls anything in time. It's not relevant to time. Time is not a concern of praxeology, whereas time is a concern of physics. Perhaps, very much perhaps, in 10,000 years, in 20,000 years, in 20 billion years, the weight of an electron will be different. We don't know. And that's why we can never prove something. For example, when we talk about the empirical science, you never prove something. You simply test, observe, and test again. And then test again and test again. And over repeated amounts of time, I mean, I'm not going to go and throw myself out a window to test if gravity's working today, but we do have to consider this. We have to consider that these forces don't exist a priori. They exist after the fact. And so I really want to drive home this point because this is the fundamental difference in praxeology and what makes it so special. So I have here is the moment. We're only concerned with the moment. Do two chemicals combine, they result in an explosion? That happens now, maybe not in 1,000 years. We don't know. Things are either true or untrue. In an a priori in praxeology, it's true or untrue. It's logical or not logical. There is no other outcome. In an empirical science, there is. We can never say something's not true. We can never say that something doesn't exist, that this type of tree doesn't exist because we didn't observe it in South America, and we only know that this tree grows in South America. That's ignorance on our part. We don't know if this tree exists somewhere else. So what we can do is we can falsify something. We can say this type of tree, or this type of tree does grow in South America. So the statement that this type of tree doesn't grow in South America is false. And so we can add to useful information through that. But we can only falsify things when we talk about empirical sciences. This is very important for economics. Very, very important for our consideration when we read the newspaper and so on, and I'll get a little bit more to that. One is deduction, one is observation. Simply put, we put, in praxeology, we say, we make a statement, humans act, which is where the word praxeology comes from. And then we move on and we form a list of logical deductions from this axiomatic position. And there's nothing else. It's common, it's done in common language. There is no trick or no symbolism that is obfuscating the matter at hand. We simply put it in this manner and somebody could read it. You don't have to be educated. You just have to have the ability to reflect and think about what's being put down and speak the language, of course. And then that's it. It's either true or it's untrue. We have observation only in the empirical sciences. We can only say, I've observed X happen. I've observed Y happen. I've observed Z happen. And so I have here two quotes from two scientists that should hopefully highlight the example of what I mean. So Archimedes said, the area of any circle is equal to a right-angled triangle in which one of the sides about the right angle is equal to the radius and the other side to the circumference of the circle. Now this is pretty plain language. It takes a little bit of thinking about to just digest right away because it is a somewhat complex thing. And this is perhaps why praxeology is not very well understood, because it is quite difficult to conceptualize this instantly. However, what Archimedes said here is never going to be untrue. This is always true. The area of a circle is always equal to the right angle r, pi r squared. Okay, this will always be true no matter what. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. This is an observation. This is not founded on logic. This is Einstein coming up with a theory after he observed something. He observes, I think the story is he observed a train and he saw the time dilation, whatever. This is an observation at our moment in time and could very well be untrue. We don't know. We test and test and test. So far we could say it's held up, sure. But we test and test and test and we continuously test. So to put these two together, I have Krugman putting them together for us. I said he was my assistant. I want to give an example of something in economics that we might actually apply. I've been talking about physics, geometry. Who cares about those two boring sciences, right? We're all here for economics, so this is a bit of a compare and contrast. In praxeology, we might say, if we're a praxeological economist, we might say a person expects to receive more than he gives in a voluntary exchange, or the exchange, or he would never undergo the exchange. Okay, this is we can all see this, we know it to be true. It's true tomorrow, as it was true yesterday, as it was true 10,000 years from now. In the empirical science, we say, in economics, we say we must create an indifference curve to determine the value of the exchange or question the person afterwards. And for those of you that don't know what an indifference curve is, it's just mathematical nonsense. It's pseudo-symbolism that's created to form these, to bolster these assumptions that the initial theorist made. It has no basis in reality. It's modeling. It's a type of modeling that is designed to conduct an experiment because, as economists, unfortunately, for the last about 60 years, we've been progressing more and more to the empirical method. And I'll get more to that. But or question the person afterwards. I mean, we can conduct a survey. Are you happy with this exchange to somebody? You know, we're talking about, let's say, British people and their dentists. Are you happy with your dentist? You might say to the British gentleman walking in the street, and he would say, sure, I'm happy with my dentist. You might say, okay.
He's American.
He's a liar, but no. You might say, okay, fine, you check that off on your survey. You go to the next person, are you happy? No, I'm not. You did a terrible job, look at my teeth. And so this person's telling the truth, and check him off, and so on and so on. This has a problem. This, unfortunately, has a very large, fatal problem in that when we attempt to make observations about a social phenomenon, we ourselves are social actors. We are part of the system of observation. And whenever we interact with that, we fundamentally change it. We can never have a system that is unchanged by us asking that question, by us asking, are you happy with your dentist? The person might, for example, feel pressured to say yes. Maybe this person's from the dentist. Maybe this person's going to beat me if I say, no, he's the son of the dentist. You know, who knows? He's going to break my teeth, so I go back to the dentist. You never know. But the point is, we fundamentally change things. And this is true whenever an observer is attempting to observe a system that he himself is within. He's not an observer. He's within that system itself. So he can never be this godly observer, looking from Mount Olympus down at us and seeing us like ants and say, you must do this to be happy. He himself is within that system. And to give you a little bit of a better example, because British people obviously are watching and are tired of me making fun of them, is the Federal Reserve Chairman. Federal Reserve Chairman one day wakes up and says, okay, I've got a plan. I've got a plan to fix the economy. And he comes up, he gives a presentation. They have these meetings that we probably don't hear about in the news very often, but they have these meetings. He gives a press conference to the public. And he says, well, I'm going to enact this plan. So he might say, I'm going to lower interest rates. I'm going to raise interest rates. Reduce the federal funds rate. Whatever he wants to do, right? And then all of a sudden, the bond market is going to shift. The bond market's going to shift higher, the bond market's going to shift lower. We don't know. The price of bonds are going to change. Now, what's interesting about this from an empirical perspective, and going back to what I just said a little bit earlier, and why empiricism is fatally flawed in economics, is because he himself is an actor within that system. By him saying this, he's influencing the price of bonds. It doesn't matter if what he's saying is true, it doesn't matter if what he's saying is false. None of that matters. What matters is that there's even a reciprocal, a feedback between the market and him, between these actors, because he himself is an actor within this system. And when we put it like this, as I'm doing now with Krugman together, when we put it like this, we can never be a clear outside observer. We can never have that perfect objectivity that we're searching for in the mighty high empirical sciences in economics. So, if somebody knows who said this, I'll be very impressed. Maybe you can guess, because I think it's only 2 sentences and it looks like a novel, so. It is a great fault of symbolic pseudo-mathematical methods of formalizing a system of economic analysis that they expressly assume strict independence between the factors involved and lose all their cogency and authority if this hypothesis is disallowed. Whereas in ordinary discourse, where we are not blindly manipulating but know all the time what we are doing and what the words mean, we can keep at the back of our heads the necessary reserves and qualifications and the adjustments which we have to make later on, in a way in which we cannot keep complicated partial differentials at the back of several pages of algebra which assume that they all vanish. Too large a proportion of recent mathematical economics are mere concoctions, as imprecise as the initial assumptions they rest on, which allow the author to lose sight of the complexities and interdependencies of the real world in a maze of pretentious and unhelpful symbols. Any guess?
I'll take a guess.
Oh, don't do it if you know who it is, because then I'm just going to look like a fool after saying, oh, I bet you guys don't know who it is. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
My guess, it's only a guess, but my guess would be on Greenspan talking to Congress.
No. No. Alan Greenspan is not quite this smart. Devious, but not smart. Bastiat? No, not Bastiat. Bastiat was French. He doesn't speak it.
Von Mises?
No, not von Mises either. It's,
John Maynard Keynes?
yep, there you go. He got it. It's Keynes. Keynes wrote this. You could see by the absolutely 2 sentences of just... Keynes wrote this. And I included this for my next reason. Guess who? He didn't get it right either, so that's why he's in this. He didn't know either, don't worry. I wanted to point that out because I came across reading that and felt it was very profound for several reasons. Because Keynes was right. Keynes was absolutely right. We do today hide all of these complex interdependencies, all of this dynamic interactions in economics within a maze of pretentious and unhelpful symbols. We create indifference curves, but what are indifference curves? The point at which a person values pizza and ice cream equally. But no person has this. No person has an indifference curve. I don't have an indifference. I hope I don't have an indifference curve. I was at the doctor last week. He said I had no indifference curves. So I'm happy, but I've never seen one. They don't exist. They're there to create this feeling in academia that they're doing something vaguely scientific. And it's almost painful because they don't understand epistemology. They don't understand why they understand something. And they don't understand their own methodology. They don't understand how they're going about their experimentation. So it becomes this almost cycle of masturbatory academia, where you're just looking at somebody else's work and you say, "Oh, indifference curve, I like that. That's good. Oh, this equation looks big. That's good. I don't understand it, but I like it." And so But it has nothing to do with the real world. We don't exist in an indifference curve. We don't exist in a supply and demand curve. There is no such thing as an equilibrium. And we say these things. We say, well, I often find it funny that we have, critics who will almost rightly point out, they say, well, free market people, they love to point to their equilibriums, but that doesn't exist. And they're right, it totally doesn't exist. But Austrians don't point to equilibriums. We don't point to anything resembling an equilibrium because there is no such thing. There is no point where supply and demand meet on X graph. There are only people. People who buy things at X price, people who sell things at Y price. They meet, sometimes they don't meet. There is no equilibrium that the market's working towards. This is simply an aggregate, a concoction of this pseudo-mathematical, pretentious, and unhelpful symbolism that is plaguing economics today. And it's all because of the shift to an empirical positivist philosophy, really, but an empirical methodology within economics since about the 1950s. I wasn't alive then. I heard a lot of you people are retired. I'm not retired yet. But in the 1950s, we had this drastic shift. Keynes wasn't writing this in the 2000s. What he wrote was in 1930, I think. This was in the general theory, these two sentences. And this is something that we have to take into account. In the 1930s, Keynes is condemning the use of these complex algebraic expressions to present economic truth. Now, there's a lot of neo-Keynesians, there's a lot of people that predicate their philosophy on Keynes and don't know it, that have no problem spitting out pages of mathematics and saying it's economics. It's not economics. And this really has to do with the shift in scientific philosophy to positivism around the 1950s. I won't really get into that, it's a little bit more, but and I think we have this opinion that scientists tend to progress, that our cell phones get smaller and smarter every year, and so we see this and we go on and we go on. And we're like, well, economics is probably the same. We're getting smarter. We're getting smarter. And so you have people, and this is a danger because you have people that come up and they say, well, maybe it's true that 50 years ago we couldn't plan to build a city. We tried planning. We tried central planning to build cities. We tried planning the toilet paper economy in the USSR, and it didn't really work. But they didn't have computers. They didn't have smartphones. So maybe now it will work. But this is just more of the same fatal flaw in economics. It's more of the same fatal empirical methodology that's so pervasive and so important, but not even seen. It's like this invisible hand. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but it's this like invisible actor that's just ruining economics. Anyways, economics isn't progressing. It's been regressing, unfortunately. And only recently, I would say, with the various political movements, have people begun to understand Austrian economics. And I can't be too pessimistic because, really there has been a lot of growth recently. The fact that I'm sitting here talking about praxeology to a room full of people is mind-blowing, because 5 years ago, I would have never I thought I would be alone in Colorado. I mean, I was on like a desert island, right, when I would say the word praxeology. And now it's becoming a little bit more understood. People are saying, well, wait a minute, why can't economics be simple? Why can't I use common sense? Why can't I use my reason that has carried me throughout life to say, well, wait a minute, you said that a hurricane or a bombing in a city is good for the economy? That doesn't seem quite right. That doesn't seem like it jives with my experiences. Usually, I destroy my toaster. The next day, I'm not having toast, right? I'm not better because of that, right? And so, but this is passed off as like serious economic. Like I'm an academician. I know what I'm talking about. If you bomb that city tomorrow, we're going to have huge economic growth. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous, and everybody who looks at economics, and I think this is why there is so much disquietude, perhaps, within the masses of people today, because they look at this and they say, well, there's this huge conflict between what I experience in my daily life, my very simple reasoning, and what you're saying is true. How can firebombing a city make it grow faster? That doesn't make any sense. You're just destroying things. And yet you have assistant Nobel Prize winning economists who will argue this, who will argue that very fact, and you can't help but laugh. So I have some further reading, but I'll get back to that. I'm going to go back. There we go. I want to go back to his cat. No, I want to go back to the definition that I have here. Praxeology is an a priori methodology of Austrian economics, and we know what a priori is now. It starts from the statement humans act, known as the action axiom. The reason this is axiomatic is, and when I say axiomatic, I mean it's something that's true. It's something that we cannot dispute. Part of the reason that the statement humans act is axiomatic is because it's unrefutable. And I mean very, very literally is unrefutable. Because when we attempt to refute it, we're acting. So humans act. This is a statement. This implies purpose and so on, and we go through deduction in praxeology. I'm not going to get into long praxeological deductions or defending them or anything like that, because I want you to be aware of what praxeology is more than anything. And this is what's so radical, is that Austrian economics is based off of two words, humans act. And from there, we take logical deduction, just like geometry. We have a definition, we have lines, and all of a sudden we come to formulas for formulas for triangles. We figure out the volume of a sphere. We figure out the volume of a cylinder. I mean, this seems almost like magic, but it's just people much smarter than me coming up with these reflexive deductions from pure logic. And it's so elegant and so beautiful in the way that it's eternal. I think Euclid said logic is eternal. And what he means by that is just this. He means that there is no point in time where we're ever going to come back and say humans don't act. I can never make the statement humans don't act. I'm defeating myself in the process. And so from this, we verbally deduce our claims. And this is why reading Austrian books, reading Austrian articles has probably entranced so many non-economists. Why I think, for example, certain political movements are so grassroots, are so autodidactic. Because we can read an article on the internet and it says, well, you know, Krugman, I think firebombing, I think Hurricane Katrina is bad for the economy. I think it's just destruction. I think it's that because you're destroying a house, and what are you getting out of it? Nothing, right? Okay, well that's pretty simple. That's a very simple statement, but you're almost scoffed at in academia if you say that. You're a type of pariah. That's the most ridiculous thing. Where's your algebra to prove that? You don't have any algebra. Where's your tests? This isn't economics, and this is why Austrian economics is so radically different and resonates, and I think is growing so quickly with, for example, the internet. The practice of praxeology is truly what separates Austrians from public choicers, empiricists, Keynesians, empiricists, historicists, psychotic. That's a different subject. But basically all you need to know now is that anybody that you're going to see on the television is a positivist, is practicing empiricism when they say, well, I think the economy is going to do X and Y and so on. Economics is a subset of praxeology. What do I mean by that? Praxeology is human action, is the study of human action. There's a lot of things that fall under that aren't explored today. One of the things I'm working on partially is praxeology and warfare. And it seems almost like counterintuitive for a second. But I believe that praxeology as a science includes things like history, things like warfare, things like economics, things like psychology. And it includes these things because those things are based off of human action. Those sciences are based off of humans' action, how they act, why they act, etc. Those are the type of question, why they act, psychology maybe, how they act, how they trade, economics. Praxeology is what economists govern. And to give you an idea of how important praxeology is, human action, sort of the Austrian Bible, is the first few chapters of that von Mises took to write about praxeology. He didn't write about anything else, well, catalytics, but he said, this is the epistemological foundation for economics. This is why we need to conduct it in this manner. Here are my deductions from this. And he went on to write this book that is masterful in its understanding of economics. And unfortunately, most people say, well, those are the chapters that you should skip. I hear a lot, Human Action is a great book. Yeah, go ahead and read that. Just skip to chapter 3 or 4. Don't worry about those first two. Kind of weird. But really, they're really what's important. And they're not important. You don't have to be a praxeologist. You don't have to be working on these grand ideas, but you have to understand why. Why Austrian economics is so radically different, resonates with so many people, and is so simple and elegant. Praxeological truth stands independent of temporal and spatial constraints. Time and space are irrelevant to praxeology, just as they are to geometry. We don't need to know if a squared plus b squared equals c squared in Spain to know if it's true. We do need to know that if we're conducting a physics experiment. Why? Well, particles travel at different speeds underwater. Particles travel at different speeds in space. Particles travel at different speeds going through the sun. A squared plus b squared doesn't. Praxeology doesn't. Humans will act. Humans will act under the water. Humans will act in space. Humans not be acting very long inside the sun, but for a while they'll be there. It's true. It's true universally. It's true. It's free of time and free of space. So, with that definition in mind, actually, I'm going to go back. So I hope I've answered these questions. What is praxeology? How do we use praxeology? And why it matters. So, and I'd like to do, I don't know, however much time permits. I can't really see the clock from there, but, whoops. I would like to, it's F11. I'm a young man. PowerPoint was different in my time. From the beginning. I would also suggest, if I've whetted your appetite for praxeology, to check out these two. One is an essay, The Methodology of Austrian Economics by Murray Rothbard. And one is a short book by Hans-Hermann Hoppe called Economic Science and the Austrian Method. Both of those were very critical to my understanding of praxeology. It took me a while too. I think it took me about a year before it jived with me, before I took it internally and understood what it actually means. And so, 45 minutes isn't quite enough. If you're interested, I would highly, highly suggest reading The Methodology of Austrian Economics. Rothbard is a fantastic author and will very quickly present a more in-depth case for praxeology. And you can go back and reference it. He has great material references and so on. Economic science in the Austrian method is the same. It's 110 pages, 90 pages, something. Excellent book discussing almost exactly what I discussed today, positivism versus reason. So, thank you.
Want to take some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I have
anybody?
the first
Yeah, go for it.
I was just so, thank you, Alexander. That was great. I just know how you must have suffered getting your bachelor's degree at UCCS.
No.
So I'm just curious. what kind of interactions did you have with the staff? Did you challenge any of their thinking? Did you even plant a few seeds here and there among the cognizati of the...
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say one of my greater achievements in life is converting a professor to Austrian economics. I think Eubanks was, converting. I am like a high priest or something in Praxeology. But no, I had a class with him. He's a professor at UCCS. I had a class with him in my sophomore year, I believe, and it was something like I don't know, it was something called like economic freedom, and he was definitely on the libertarian side of things, on the fence, right? He wasn't like a Ballantyne, which, if you're familiar with, calls himself like a neo-Keynesian, or I don't know, some crazy thing. I don't know what he does anymore. And he was kind of leaning in that direction, but he didn't really understand Austrian economics. And by the time I graduated, I had talked with him a lot. We had talked about the subject, because he pulled me into his office on the first day and said, how do you know this stuff, right? Like, you're 17 or something. I don't know what I was when I was a sophomore, but how do you? And I said, well, I pretty much read a lot. And he said, okay. And he's like, okay, well, that's nice. Well, anyways, I love his classes, right? He teaches in the Socratic method. It's 3 or 4 hours of conversation or dialogue, which I am great at because I have terrible handwriting. So I prefer to talk. And over the years, it got to the point where when I think I was graduating, the next year he was teaching a class at UCCS called Austrian Economics 101. And so I was really, really happy about that, and I'm happy about that. And he asked me, he said, well, what books should I look at to look at this? And I gave him a list and everything. So that was my interaction. Other than that, the other economics professors, to be honest, it's not really a lot of interaction. They lecture, they'll say their piece for 2 hours, I'll roll my eyes for 2 hours, I'll go home, not do my homework, get a C in the class or something because I just take the test, and then I'm on my way. I didn't really have much interaction with them. I wasn't interested in interacting with them. I know that I must sound like some elitist on, like this high mountain looking down at these academicians. I hate them. But it really is a matter of this. They're not in it to interact with students a whole lot. A lot of them are there to do their job and process children, and they go through. I mean, that sounds horrible, but it's what they do. It's how a lot of people just aren't interested. I almost can't even blame them because a lot of students aren't interested. A lot of students don't belong at a university getting an economics degree. They don't care about economics. So why are they there? And it's because, I mean, I can go on forever about the subject, so I won't, but we can have another question if anybody.
Could the question please come to the mic so that everybody gets to the internet so we can have a question?
I just have a comment, not really a question, but in teaching economics, I noticed the same thing that you were talking about with the graphs, that the graphs would only pertain with those certain conditions, this amount of rainfall, this amount of cold, if you're talking about ice cream, whatever, and that particular point in time, anything fore or aft completely changes the equation. And that, to me, was very frustrating and one of the reasons why I started looking into Austrian economics.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's a really big tell for me because you have what are supposed to be representations of reality, and they're missing the dimension of time. And you think, well, wait a minute, time's kind of important. I don't live in a timeless world, right? Things change every day, every second. People are moving their businesses, are interacting with one another, and this dynamic temporal relation is never and can never be captured within an algebraic equation. So, but yeah, absolutely, I agree. And you had a question, or Will has a question? He's disgusted and just
While he's getting to the microphone, Walker is winning with 59% to 40%. Oh, 35%
Wow. Thanks.
All right. Have the dead voted yet?
For November.
Have the dead voted yet?
Well, they get counted twice, so we're.
Yeah, first I want to say thanks, Al. It was
Yeah.
a really great presentation. Really enjoyed it. My question was, do you think what value is there, if any, in empirical evidence? I mean, I've heard you say before, you can use empirical evidence to maybe disprove, somebody else's argument, but you can't use it to disprove an argument or an Austrian argument because it's based on epistemology and methodology, and before the fact. So, but what value would you place on empirical evidence in this belief system, if any?
Well, actually a lot, because I would be a methodological dualist, right? I believe that there's a place for empirical and for praxeological methodologies within the sciences. But they describe two different bodies of knowledge, right? When we're talking about a particle, we're not going to know what it is logically. So I'm totally in favor of continuously testing and testing and testing. When we're talking about what the average temperature of the world is, I'm all for testing and testing and testing. But what I find interesting, what almost motivates me more to be like this extreme methodological, epistemological radical, is that they're doing bad empirical science. They're bad at the science that they profess to do, and it's so bad to look at it because they don't even understand their own methodology. And so you have empiricists that are attempting to do science that are not even doing empiricism. And, oh man, it's really rough. But, I'm sorry, I'm going to get gray hairs when I'm 30, but I think, I can't believe it. But, it's the same thing when you look at, for example, climate change, right? The science of climate change. You have the same type of ratiocination going on, where it's this masturbatory academia that's just like, okay, well, this didn't really fit what I was looking for. This data didn't really fit what I was looking for. I'm going to change my model. I'm going to create a new model that fits the data so I can get a conclusion that I want. That's not even empirical science. That's not. That's. There's stories. Of that. Like we can talk about just outright data manipulation from some people. I read an article the other day that was about a Danish psychologist who conducted a lot of studies, which I'll get to in a second, but who said that meat makes you more aggressive. Okay, all right, meat makes you more aggressive. Makes you bad behavior, with so on and so on. Well, turns out over his 20-year career, publishing something like 400 papers, he didn't actually go and do any surveys, any tests of people that he claimed to do. Never mind the fact that he's conducting his experiments in the wrong methodological approach. Never mind that. He didn't even conduct them in an empirical approach. Because, that's not what academia is about now. Academia is about publishing papers so you can continue, or, continuing the cycle so you can get, tenure, or if you've got tenure, publishing papers so you can get paid more. But I absolutely believe in empirical science applied properly. But they both have different spheres of relevance. Physics, geometry, two different things, two different methodologies.
Yes. Gotta lower this thing. Have you thought of praxeology as applied to other disciplines, academic disciplines, different than economics?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like I said, what is my current obsession that I can't sleep at night thinking about is warfare. And lately, I've been reading just tons of military history and tons of military treaties. And I believe that praxeology is the methodology for military martial warfare science. And I say that because if we look at, for example, some of the more enduring texts like Gorin no Sho, Book of the Five Rings, or The Art of War, I think somebody even said Sun Tzu earlier today, they were written a long time ago. Long time ago. They didn't have rifles. They didn't have radar. They didn't have airplanes. They didn't have submarines, nuclear bombs, nothing. Okay, they were fighting with spears. Musashi was fighting with a sword. I mean, yet these texts today are still in print, are still meticulously studied at military academies. Why? Why is that the case? How? I better ask the question, how can that be the case? Well, the only way that that can be the case is if they are not constrained by a temporal constraint, which is to say that warfare is not about if you have an M16 or an AK-47, if you have a tank or an airplane. Warfare is about a set of axioms that we can deduce principles from and how you conduct warfare and how you win warfare. Sun Tzu did this in his treatise. He said nothing of, well, nothing. He said very few things of a temporal nature. What he said were things like, warfare is the art of deception. What he said were things like, if your troop disposition is formless, it's impossible for the most sagacious minds to counter it. This is true today as it was true 4,000 years ago, as it will be true 4,000 years into the future. This is praxeological deduction from axiom. And so I definitely believe warfare, which unfortunately hasn't been explored. And I think, to my knowledge, I'm the only person that's done, like, explored this in any capacity. There is one Polish praxeologist who's almost of a different praxeological school, but uses the word praxeology, who did write a chapter about warfare in his book on praxeology, but he came up with almost like a game theory type of situation where he made it this like matrix and said, well, if you do this, then this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this type of matrix, but it's not really praxeology. But so does that answer?
Yeah,
I think
the one thing I was thinking of, in fact, I'm writing something regarding that, is the idea of natural law and natural rights. Both of those can be deduced praxeologically, I think.
Well, and absolutely, Rothbard talks about that in his books quite extensively. He gives the whole thing of natural law, natural rights, and what that means, and how we deduce that from a logical starting point into this whole theory that seems like, well, how did you get there? But it's very clear. Go ahead and just read it. Read it and see.
Rothbard is one of the clearest writers of complex ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it shows a clear mind. But also Rothbard talks about, to continue on to your question, history. History is an excellent, excellent topic for praxeology. Rothbard actually wrote a 4-volume series called Conceived in Liberty, which I would highly, highly recommend to any of you here. And it's about the American Revolution. It's just a history of the American Revolution, but he writes it from a praxeological standpoint. And I think, immediately can see the difference, because it's not about whether or not, they were using muskets, or whether or not it was raining that day, or whether or not, so-and-so temporal. It was about, well, he didn't like the way he was being treated, so he did this. He didn't like this, so he'd rather have done this. And that, I think, applies perfectly to history, because it really allows us to understand history in a way that we can't really understand, because we can't go back and test things, right? We can't go back and say, I mean, sometimes in experimental history we can, but praxeology is great for history as well. So.
No, actually, they're pretty wrapped up in races.
All right. Well, let's give Alexander a great round. All right. Thank you, Alex. Don't forget, we're not meeting in July. I've got something, just because you mentioned the neutrino. Okay? So here's the latest joke. You've got to be quick to catch this. Bartender says, "We don't serve your kind in here." A neutrino walks into the bar. And then, see, one more thing was brought up on just the progress of technology. I thought would be interesting. I came across this today somewhere.
The neutrino order to drink, the bartender said no charge.
This, just wanted to show you a picture of a 5 gig hard drive from 1950.
Oh, my star.
That's what's on your old phones.
5 megs.
Oh, 5 megs, sorry, 5 megs. That's 5 megs, 5 megs, okay? So think about your 8 meg memory stick or your 32 gig iPhone, right? 5 megs, so physics obviously has its use. And you weren't saying it didn't. Okay, at any rate, very great, very good. So schmooze around for a while if you want, and we will not